up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I'm back with another Donna Adelson video, and we are on trial day 1. So the prosecution gave their opening statements, and she began by saying that the Adelson family had a big problem, and that big problem was Dan Markell.
And the solution to that problem was the defendant's son, Charlie Adelson. Charlie Adelson was the solution because he had a girlfriend with connections to the type of people who were willing and capable of pointing a gun at a complete stranger and pulling the trigger.
So Donna Adelson told her daughter, Wendy Adelson, that the most important part of her divorce is relocation, because she wanted her and her grandsons to move to Miami to be closer to her and the rest of the family. And she told her that this should be her non-negotiable. However, the judge in the divorce denied Wendy's request to relocate her sons. But Donna Adelson said that Dan Markell hadn't beat them yet. She thought about bribing Markell to let the sons move to Miami. So she offered to pay for plane tickets for him to come see the boys. She offered to pay for their education. She even offered to give him $1 million, but none of that worked. So then she had another plan. She decided that they would torture him. So she came up with a plan of action, and we're gonna listen to what some of those plans were.
So, for the plan of action, the defendant knew that Dan Markell was devoutly Jewish. So she came up with the idea for Wendy to pose Dan Markell's sons for pictures in front of a Catholic church, and then post the pictures to social media, and even announce on social media she was getting the children baptized just to make it appear to Dan Markell that she was changing their religion. The defendant assured Wendy Adelson that this would all be an act to get Dan Markell to agree to let her move to Miami, but told Wendy Adelson that in order to pull off this stunt, she had to put on the acting performance of her life. The defendant said that it did not matter to her if Wendy had to dress her 2 little toddlers up in Nazi or SS uniforms, as long as she was able to get them to South Florida and show Dan Markell that he was not in control. Her life, meaning Wendy's life, as well as the defendant's life, Harvey Adelson's life, and Charlie Adelson's life, depended on Wendy Adelson and the boys being able to relocate to Miami. And the defendant said that she would never, never, never give up and never stop fighting for Wendy and the boys to be relocated to Miami.
Then the prosecutor goes on to recall what Wendy said during her interview with the police after Dan Markell was found unalive. And here's what she said after informing her parents about Dan being unalive.
And after she got off the phone with her mother, the defendant, Wendy Adelson, said to police, "Well, they acted surprised, so that's a relief." And when asked by law enforcement if anyone could have killed Dan Markell on her behalf, she also told the police about her brother, Charlie Adelson. Wendy admitted to police that her brother, Charlie Adelson, had joked that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markell as a divorce present, but decided to buy her a TV instead because it was cheaper. And what do you know? The same TV that Charlie Adelson bought his sister as a divorce gift would be Wendy Adelson's alibi the morning of the murder. An alibi, the TV repair appointment that was set up by her parents, Harvey Adelson and Donna Adelson, the defendant.
And then she goes on to talk about how the police were able to figure out who was connected to the unaliving. So they knew that a Toyota Prius fled the scene the same day that Dan Markell was unalived. So they needed to find that car and find out who was driving the car. So once they were able to find out who was driving that car, it was a rental car. Once they found out who was driving that car, they were able to link the person in that car back to Charlie Adelson's girlfriend, which ultimately led back to Charlie, which ultimately led back to Donna. So then the prosecutor said that there were 3 ways that this led back to Donna Adelson being at least partially responsible for this unaliving. And the first was her motive, because she didn't like Dan, and that was well documented. The second one was this investigation of the car leading back to Charlie and ultimately leading back to her. And the third was the money trail, as you'll hear in this next clip.
Months after the homicide, Garcia, Rivera, and Magbanua all acquired some big ticket items. Rivera and Garcia both bought motorcycles and cars. Magbanua got a breast augmentation surgery and later received a black Lexus sedan whose previous owner was Harvey Adelson. Catherine Magbanua's bank records were analyzed, and there was no check ever written or matching cash withdrawal for the car or the breast augmentation. Bank records also showed that Magbanua's account had a huge spike in cash deposits around the time of the murder. She deposited more money in her account in the 5 weeks after the murder than in the entire year before the murder. And this was during a time when there was no record of her being employed anywhere. And also, about 2 months after the murder, this defendant added Catherine Magbanua to the payroll at the Adelson family's dental practice, the one that she kept the accounts for, the defendant kept the accounts for. And the defendant started issuing her regular checks from their business account every 2 weeks, despite the fact that she did not work there at the time. Magbanua didn't work there. Law enforcement noticed that each one of the 44 checks that were written to Catherine Magbanua every 2 weeks over the course of the next 2 years after the murder were signed by this defendant, Donna Adelson.
So back in April of 2016, the police were able to put a wiretap on Charlie and his ex-girlfriend, Katie. The problem was they had been broken up for about a year at that point. So they really had no reason to be talking, and they especially had no reason to be talking about the unaliving of Dan Markell. So they had to create a situation that would make them talk about it. So they decided to set up a sting operation and go undercover as a blackmailer and go after Donna, as you'll hear in this next clip.
This undercover agent is posing as a blackmailer. He hands the defendant a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper is a news article about Dan Markell's murder. And written on the piece of paper is a phone number and the amount of $5,000. He tells the defendant that he knows the Adelsons are taking care of Katie, and he's basically there to blackmail to get more money out of them or out of her on Rivera's behalf to even things out because he knows they're taking care of Katie. He never says Charlie Adelson's name or anything about Charlie Adelson to Donna Adelson. The defendant then puts the piece of paper in her purse and walks away without ever looking at the piece of paper because she knew exactly what it was about. Then law enforcement listens in to see what will happen next. Will the defendant go straight to the police to report the blackmail? Or will she do something else entirely? And as suspected, based on the previously observed communication pattern, the first person that this defendant calls is Charlie Adelson, despite the fact that the blackmailer never mentioned Charlie Adelson to her. On that first call, you would think the first thing that Donna Adelson would say to Charlie Adelson is, "Oh my God, it's so crazy. Some man just came up to me, handed me an article about Danny's murder, and he's demanding money from us." But she never says any of that. In fact, the defendant never says Dan Markell's name at all. Instead, she tells Charlie Adelson that she needs to talk to him in person about some paperwork that was just delivered to her. She said that it involves the two of us. And that he should know what she's talking about. The defendant and Charlie Adelson continue talking, and she says that he should bring cash to their meeting. And she says, the TV is probably about 5. The defendant tells Charlie Adelson that the man who approached her mentioned an ex-girlfriend. The defendant never says which ex-girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. She never says Magbanwa's name to Charlie Adelson in that phone call. She only says that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend. Charlie Adelson never asked his mom, my ex-girlfriend? Which ex-girlfriend? He's had a lot. He never asked that. Because as the evidence will show, he didn't need to. He knew the TV is probably 5 meant that she was being blackmailed about Danny's murder, where the TV was the alibi, and he knew that the ex-girlfriend in question was the only ex-girlfriend that he had solicited to find a hitman for him, Catherine Magbanwa.
So in this next clip, the prosecutor is talking about what happened after Charlie talks to his mom and he decides to go and talk to Katie.
Charlie Adelson and Catherine Magbanwa meet in person at a restaurant called Dolce Vita in Miami. And while they sit at their table in this busy, noisy restaurant, an undercover FBI agent is sitting at a table nearby with a camera hidden in a bag, recording the conversation. And in the recording, we hear Charlie Adelson discussing whether the man who walked up to his mother could be an undercover police officer, or he could be someone trying to legitimately blackmail them. And if it's a blackmailer, is it somebody who just saw a way to make a quick buck? Or is it another situation entirely, which would be much worse for the Adelsons? Is it actually someone with inside information about Donna Adelson's role in the murder of Dan Markel, and that person could tell police what they know? Charlie Adelson reassures Katie, Catherine Magbanwa, that if it is the police, that is a good thing. Charlie Adelson thinks that, hey, if it's the police, that means the police don't have enough evidence to charge anybody. You know, they're just fishing for information. And in fact, Charlie Adelson tells her, hey, if they had any evidence, we would have already gone to the airport.
So while he's talking to Katie, he comes up with a solution, and here's his solution.
And so Charlie Adelson then offers that the best solution might be to have the blackmailer killed, and that he's willing to pay whatever it takes. He says, so help me God, if they F with my family, it's going to be Nazi shit, because this will be done. I mean, Katie, I don't care what I spend. And after hearing that Charlie Adelson wants someone killed and is willing to pay whatever it takes to get it done, Magbanwa then asked Charlie Adelson to help her out. And Charlie Adelson reassures her she'll be taken care of and reminds her she's on salary at the parents' dental practice.
So ultimately, Charlie was convicted in November of 2023. And after he was convicted, his mother, Donna Adelson, appeared to try to flee the U.S. for Vietnam.
She and her husband purchased one-way tickets with a fast-track emergency visa to Vietnam. And Vietnam does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S., as she would have learned from her searches. And just days later, she was stopped by law enforcement on the jetway in Miami International, where she was boarding her one-way flight to Vietnam. And she was then charged for her participation in the murder of Dan Markel.
So the prosecutor wrapped up her opening statements by saying this.
You will see that this defendant conspired with her son, Charlie Adelson, who solicited his girlfriend, Catherine Magbanwa, to get this murder done. And then this defendant paid her with cash, with checks for the job once it was completed. The defendant acted in furtherance of this murder plot that went beyond just thinking about it or just talking about it. And these acts make her guilty as a principal to first-degree murder, just as if she was the one pulling the trigger in the garage herself. And while the defendant's choices helped solve a problem within her family, they came at a very high price. She took the life of a loving father of 2 little boys and caused a lifetime of grief for Dan Markel's loved ones. And at the conclusion of the evidence in this case, you will be convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that this defendant is guilty. And at that point, we'll ask you for the only verdict that does justice in this case, which is a verdict that this defendant is guilty as charged. Thank you.
So you guys, let me know what y'all think about those opening statements in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. I will be back with the defense's opening arguments and the rest of the events from trial day 1. Thank you so much for watching.
This session is adjourned.